The desert evening stretched wide, sky painted in bruised purples and fading gold. Elias Crowe moved along the dusty trail, every step heavier than the last, as if the land itself wanted him to stop. His boots scuffed the ground, raising little ghosts of powdery sand that swirled and then vanished. The silence pressed in until he could hear the rasp of his own breath. Towns like this one had always carried the same warning. Stay too long, and you'll be reminded you do not belong. Still, his hunger had teeth, and his loneliness had claws. He remembered, as he walked, the soft touch of a woman once promised him. She had rested her forehead against his, whispering love in words that felt eternal, until the day gossip spread about him, and she disappeared like smoke. The memory had grown sour, an ache that soured every kindness. Rejection was his truest companion, and it trailed him into every doorway. Would this place be any different? The town ahead was nearly abandoned, its windows shuttered, its signs cracked from sun and wind. A saloon door sagged from its hinges, swaying just enough to catch the eye. Elias pushed it open. The lantern glow inside was dim, unsteady, falling across overturned chairs and shattered glass. Yet amid the ruin, 3 figures waited, still as statues but undeniably alive. They were women, though calling them such felt too simple. Their frames were immense, shadows towering up the walls. For a heartbeat, Elias thought of the myths he'd heard at campfires. Giants who lived between mountains, too strange for the world of ordinary men. They sat in a rough triangle, their eyes fixed on him with quiet intensity. The eldest sat straight-backed, hair streaked silver, her face lined by time and defiance. Magnolia Boone did not speak. She carried her silence like a weapon honed sharp by years of ridicule. Beside her leaned June Hollis, sharp-eyed, with a smirk that was equal parts humor and warning. Her laughter, when it finally came, was brittle and dangerous, a sound born of mass scars. Half hidden in the corner was Pearl Whitaker, the youngest. She was softer, her kindness still intact despite her size, though her gaze never rose fully from the floorboards. Elias shifted, uneasy. "Evening," he said, voice dry as creek stones. The words seemed to fall flat, absorbed by the heavy air. June tilted her head, her grin spreading as she studied him. "Look here, sisters," she said, a crow blown off course. Her tone cut, playful but merciless. Elias stiffened, recognizing the game. He'd been called worse by women and men alike, until shame became the coat he never took off. "I don't mean trouble," he murmured. "Just looking for rest." Pearl's gaze flickered upward, quick as a shy flame. Magnolia's silence deepened, her eyes searching his face as though she might measure the weight of his truth. Elias felt the sting of their judgment, not cruel, but heavy, inevitable. He braced himself. He had always been found wanting. But then June rose to her full height. The saloon seemed smaller for it, the rafters lower. She stepped forward until Elias could smell smoke on her clothes, feel the tremor of her presence. Her eyes locked with his, sharp as broken glass. "You're going to have sex with us," she said. The words rang out like a shot, echoing against the empty walls. Elias froze, heart stuttering. He looked from one face to the next, June's grin unflinching, Magnolia's eyes unreadable, Pearl's cheeks flushed with something between shame and fragile courage. His breath faltered, the weight of their gaze pinning him in place. 1,000 memories crashed through him at once. Doors closing, voices mocking, lovers walking away. Fear prickled along his skin, but beneath it was something stranger, an unnamed curiosity, an ache that was not entirely dread. The saloon door behind him creaked in the wind, promising escape. Yet he did not move. Elias swallowed, his voice rough. "Why me?" June's smile softened, though it never lost its edge. "Because you stayed." The lantern hissed, shadows stretching long. Outside, the desert wind howled through broken shutters, as though the night itself approved. Elias felt the ground tilt beneath him, the old shame loosening its hold. For the first time in years, he did not turn away. And then, as if to seal his fate, the door behind him swung shut with a final groan. The barn smelled of old hay and rain-soaked wood, the kind of scent that settled deep into the lungs and refused to leave. Elias Crowe sat cross-legged near the fire the women had built in a rusted iron barrel. Sparks climbed toward the rafters like tiny prayers, fading before they reached the roof. The flames threw light against their faces, making their eyes gleam like secrets waiting to be spoken. Magnolia Boone leaned in the shadows, her hands resting heavy on her knees. She had not uttered a word since the saloon, but silence clung to her like armor, as if speaking might invite old cruelty to return. June Hollis, restless, spun a knife against the dirt floor, letting its point bite deep before flicking up again. Her grin flickered with each pass of the blade, but Elias sensed it was less amusement than defiance. Pearl Whitaker sat closest to the fire, her pale hands folded neatly, her eyes tracing the flames. She was the one whose gaze had trembled before, yet here it seemed softer, as though the fire's warmth had reached her bones. Elias chewed a crust of bread they had offered. It tasted of smoke, rough and bitter, but the gesture carried a weight that stilled him. No one had shared their meal with him in months. A strange shame crept in. How long had he forgotten the simple grace of being given something without suspicion, without cost? He glanced at them one by one, but found no answers, only gazes that pulled him deeper into questions he could not name. June finally broke the silence. "You think us strange, don't you?" Her tone was sharp, but underneath lay the faint tremor of vulnerability. Elias shifted, the truth stuck in his throat. "I've thought myself stranger," he said, the knife stilled in her hand. For a moment, the only sound was a fire crackling. Magnolia's eyes softened, the barest hint of approval flickering across her face. Pearl, too, seemed to lean closer, though she said nothing. The air thickened, no longer hostile but weighted with something else. An invitation, perhaps, or a test. The hours slipped slow. Outside, the storm gathered, wind rattling loose boards, whispering through the seams of the barn. Inside, the four of them shared fragments of lives shaped by judgment. June spoke of jeers shouted from wagons that passed their homestead. Pearl recalled children pointing at her shadow against the wall, laughing until she had behind her mother's skirts. Magnolia said nothing, but her silence was its own story, carved deep as canyon rock. Elias listened, his chest tight. Their wounds mirrored his own, though their shapes were different. He told them of the woman who left, of towns that pushed him aside, of how shame had become the only companion he trusted. His voice cracked as he spoke, and when silence followed, he feared he had revealed too much. But Pearl's hand, tentative and trembling, reached for his. It was not a grip, only the soft brush of her fingers against his knuckles. The gesture burned hotter than the fire. June smirked, though her voice carried something gentler than mockery. "Maybe you aren't so crow-like after all." Elias lowered his gaze, his heart stumbling in his chest. He felt the weight of the moment, how easily it could be broken, how fragile the thread between them. He wondered if staying here meant stepping into something larger than survival, something dangerous. Yet curiosity swelled, stronger than fear. The wind howled louder. Rain began tapping against the roof, first light, then heavier, until it drummed steady. The fire hissed with each drop that fell through cracks above. Magnolia rose, her immense form framed by shadow and flame. She moved to the door, her back straight, her chin lifted, as though she had been waiting for this night her whole life. "They will come," she said, her first word spoken low, steady, like a bell tolling in the dark. Elias's breath caught. Pearl's hand withdrew, folding once more in her lap, though her eyes lingered on his. June flipped her knife and caught it with ease, her grin returning, though it looked more like a mask pulled tight. Elias rose slowly, the hammer from earlier still within reach. The storm outside swelled, rattling the barn as if the sky itself prepared to break open. He felt the question pressing against his ribs. Would he run, as he always had, or would he stay and stand? The women waited, their gazes steady, their shadows long against the trembling walls. The fire dimmed, the lanterns flickered, and the storm roared its warning. Something was coming, and this time Elias knew escape would no longer save him. The storm broke in full fury, 1,000 fists of rain hammering the barn until the walls shuddered with each strike. Lightning split the heavens, white fire flashing across the plains, and for an instant the world stood bare and trembling. Elias Crowe gripped the hammer tight in his hand. Its rough with digging into his palm. The women stood near him, their vast shadows flickering against the trembling walls. Magnolia Boone's silence pressed steady as a stone wall. June Hollis's grin glimmered sharp with defiance, and Pearl Whitaker's eyes, wide and shining, clung to him as though he were more than he had ever believed himself to be. Hooves churned the mud outside, heavy and circling. Through the rattle of rain came voices, mocking, cruel, familiar to Elias like an old scar. "Bring out your giants," a man shouted, his laughter jagged as broken glass. "Let's see how tall they stand once they fall." Another voice rose, meaner still. "And the crow, too. Let's break his wings." Pearl flinched at the words, shoulders curling inward. June spat, knife flashing the firelight as she twirled it between her fingers. Magnolia simply lifted her chin, the storm glinting in her eyes. Elias felt the weight of their judgment pressing on his chest, not from the women, but from the men outside, echoes of every sneer he had endured. He thought of running, as he always had, of vanishing into the dark where no one could name him weak. But something stronger rooted his boots to the floor. He had heard enough doors slam, enough laughter trail behind him. Tonight, he would not add his own footsteps to that chorus. The barn door splintered inward. Rain and mud rushed through as the riders stormed inside, torchlight slicing through the dark. For men, soaked but grinning, their cruelty burning hotter than fire. The first swung a chain, its links shrieking against the wood as it cracked toward Elias. He lifted the hammer and met it, steel against iron, the clash shuddering through his arms. The man staggered, cursing. June struck next, her pitchfork driving low, forcing another to stumble back. Her laughter rang fierce, not joyful but unbroken. Magnolia surged forward with thunder in her steps, seizing a torch from a rider's hand. The flame hissed and died in her grip, smoke curling from her fists like surrender. Pearl moved last, her trembling giving way to courage as she pulled Elias aside just as a knife gleamed through the dark. Her hand lingered at his arm, steadying him as though reminding him that he was no longer alone. The fight was not graceful. It was sweat, blood, and the raw sound of survival. Elias swung wild, his breath tearing through his throat, every strike a denial of the shame that had haunted him. His muscles burned, his legs shook, yet he moved again and again, driven by something deeper than fear. For every door that had shut him out, he kept swinging. For every whisper that had cut him down, he raised his voice in silence, the hammer singing for him. The riders faltered. One fell to his knees, clutching his arm. Another cursed as June's knife traced the air near his cheek. Magnolia loomed above them, drenched and unshaken, her presence enough to break their bravado. Pearl's eyes burned with quiet fire Elias had not seen before, her frame no longer shrinking but rising into its true height. At last, the leader spat into the mud. "Not worth the trouble," he muttered, signaling retreat. Their horses wheeled, hooves churning water, and within moments they vanished into the storm, their laughter silenced, their cruelty carried off by the rain. The barn stilled. The fire sputtered, shadows flickering across faces flushed with battle and breath. Elias leaned against the wall, chest heaving, his hand raw from gripping the hammer. June let out a ragged laugh, wild and triumphant. Magnolia placed her heavy hand on his shoulder, steady as bedrock. Pearl stepped close, her eyes glistening, her hand brushing his once more, this time without fear. The storm softened, its rage broken. Elias stepped outside into the rain, letting it wash dirt and blood from his skin. Above, the clouds tore apart, stars spilling across the sky like promises kept. He closed his eyes and breathed deep, the night settling in his chest like something earned. Sometimes the world names us monstrous, he thought. Sometimes it calls us broken. But under another's gaze, we discover we were whole all along. The women stood behind him, tall against a lantern glow, no longer outcasts but guardians of something rare. Elias looked toward the horizon, where the trail glimmered faint and endless. For once, it did not look like exile.